Welcome to the Alisa Childers podcast, where we equip Christians to identify the core beliefs of historic Christianity, discern its counterfeits, and proclaim the gospel with clarity, kindness, and truth. And I can't wait for you to hear the conversation that I have just had with Jonathan Morrow, who works with Impact 360. You all know we talk about Impact 360 on the podcast all the time. It's a wonderful ministry that exists to provide opportunities for high school students and even high school graduates through their gap year program to just equip them with theology, apologetics, community, discipleship, all these wonderful things. And Jonathan, who has been working with students for 17 plus years, has just come up with a course called Refresh, a practical guide for Christian parents on smartphones and social media. And today, we are going to give you really practical advice, mainly from Jonathan's course, where you're going to learn 5 questions that you must answer as a Christian parent before you hand your kids a screen, and especially before you hand them social media. I learned a lot. This is a topic that my husband and I are we're in it with you. This is not easy. This is not for the faint of heart. And it's a difficult, complex topic because it's just really not simple, right? There's all sorts of different types of screens. There's different levels of access that kids can have to the outside world, and it's really hard to know exactly how to do that for each one of your kids, depending on their maturity level and all of those things. And Jonathan is such a great resource on this. And his course is so good, you guys. I've gotten to see many of the videos that he's made already, and I've learned so much. They're very heavily researched with data, statistics. They're also very non-judgmental. So it's very kind of coming alongside of you like, hey, let me help you out with some practical things you can do today. And especially for those of you who maybe are new parents and you are making a plan for how you're going to interact with these topics with your kids. This episode is for you. This course is for you. And Jonathan is offering our audience a 20% discount. So you're going to want to hang around for the code for that and go to jonathanmorrow.org for more information. And without any further ado, here is Jonathan Morrow. Jonathan, great to have you on. I've been really excited that you have been creating this course. It is called Refresh, a practical guide for Christian parents on smartphones and social media. I honestly can't think of a more important topic for parents. I can't think of a topic that I think about more, that my friends think about more. It can be really difficult because I think what a lot of parents that might have already raised kids that where they didn't have this type of technology, they might tend to oversimplify, but it's actually very complicated and difficult to parent in this age of the screens. So let's just start by maybe what led you to make this course, which, by the way, I'm so grateful for. I've gotten to see many of the videos, and they are so informative and so helpful. And I'm very excited to get this information out to the audience today because you're going to give us, at the end, a special discount on the course, too. But what made you want to create this?
Yeah, thanks, Alisa, and it's great to be with you. And you're right. This really came from the fact that I would have conversations with parents, moms and dads at conferences. And I remember one story in particular several years ago in which they said, you know what, we still go to youth group, our kids still go to church, we still do the same things, but the difference between my 8th grade daughter and where she is as a sophomore and junior, it's almost like a different kid, and I don't know what happened. And I began to hear that story more and more, in which what would happen is they were introduced to a whole world of inputs through screens and social media that in many ways was kind of stealing their faith. It was stealing their kind of zest for life. It was making them sad or compare all the
Wow.
time or feel bad about themselves or whatever it is. And so I've been thinking about this issue. I wrote Welcome to College years ago because I love helping students walk with Jesus for a lifetime. And as I've been thinking about this topic, I truly believe it's the number one parenting issue of our day, discipleship issue of our day, because everything comes through our phones. And
Right.
so, because of that, as moms and dads, we can be faithful in these other areas, but the overwhelming inputs that are coming in, if we're not paying attention to that, it just nudges them like 1,000 little nudges. And before we know it, they've shifted. And we're like, what happened? Like, what happened to my kid, my son or daughter, who is disengaged and all of, I mean, there's normal teenage stuff, but then there's that plus screens and social media. And so at many levels, I felt like it was essential to begin to give parents something that we're all busy. We're overwhelmed. We're trying to
Right.
navigate life. We love our kids. And I was like, okay, I wanted to do something with videos and something that was helpful with checklists and things like that so that it could help us take action on things that matter. And so that really was my burden. And I deeply believe that it's going to help a lot of people because we have to do something because it's just a massive, massive issue, as we'll talk about.
Right. And I think even just thinking about one or two things we can do can be less overwhelming than trying to, just be overwhelmed with this whole new thing. It's kind of like what's the phrase? A death by a thousand paper cuts. And
Hmm.
if we think about even how influenced adults are by the stuff that's coming in through our screens, by the algorithms, by this or by that, I mean, how much more are our kids who don't even have a fully developed brain yet? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I know that this is a very relevant topic for so many parents. I know that when my kids were younger, my daughter would ask me, "When can I have a phone?" I mean, she meant a screen, like a smartphone. And I said, "Well, when you're old enough to get a job and buy one for yourself when you're an adult." That used to be my answer. And I look back at my former self and I can appreciate the heart behind it, but it wasn't realistic because then I started to think, well, I have a very limited time of her in my home where I can actually disciple her on how to use this thing. So,
Yep.
Jonathan, we started with a dumb phone. We started with a phone. It did have a screen, but it had no access to internet. Of course, no apps, no social media, nothing like that. But that didn't actually work out very well for us because some of the new numbers that they were recycling, she was getting pornographic texts, like spam texts,
Mm.
from these pornographic sites. Now, she couldn't click the links, thank God, but she got so many of those. We thought, okay, we have to maybe try something else. So then we went to the iPhone. Now she was a little older, and she had no access to the internet. She couldn't search anything. And then, as time went on, we slowly started lifting some of those prohibitions. But I feel like in the scheme of things, we even started too early. She was almost, I think, 14. Maybe she was around 14, 14 and a half. But I'm seeing that kids are starting to get these phones earlier and earlier. And one of the things I really loved about your videos is you gave so much information, statistics, you gave studies. And so I wanted to ask you about some of that. Is it
Mhm.
true that are kids in general getting screens at an earlier age?
Yeah, it really is, and you've hit the nail on the head because even the world that we live in over the last 3 years is very different than the world before that 3 years ago with how fast the technologies are compounding, and so but yeah, I mean, 31% of 8-year-olds, I came across of 8-year-olds have a smartphone.
Wow.
That's just madness. 42% of 10-year-olds have a smartphone, 91% of 14-year-olds, and so what that means is you're aiming the power of all of that marketing and devices and addictive behavior, all of that stuff at a little kid who has no ability and no resilience and honestly awareness of what's even happening.
Yeah.
And so what's happening is moms and dads, motivated by most of the time very good reasons, like I want to be able to keep up with my kid, or I don't want to be left out, or I want to know where they're at, or something like that. They give them a device, but then they don't do anything with it, and it's basically opened up this whole new world. And then
Mm.
sometimes, you know what? And again, one of the things I share in the course, it's a guilt-free zone. Like
Yeah.
there's no perfect parenting on this stuff. It is you're learning as you're going. I'm trying to give real actionable tools. So totally guilt-free zone because we've all been in those moments of weakness where you're like, okay, I just need time. Here's a screen. We're on a
Sure.
road trip. Watch this. And so, but what happens is we never come back to it, and then they just grow up with it, and then that screen, in a very real sense, is a part of their childhood, and that's such a different dynamic than really any generation has faced up until this point.
Yeah. What else would you say is different, just as far as childhood goes for kids today? Because I even think about my kids or versus my childhood when we would go outside. My mom would just say, "You have to be outside right now. Like you can't come inside the house for 2 or 3 hours." And we would just
Yeah.
find something to do out there. And we would even go to the neighbor's house, go down the street, go around the block. But nowadays, it's like if you let your kids go around the block, somebody's gonna call the cops or something. It's a totally different world, isn't it? How do you see it
Yeah.
being different for this generation in other ways
Yeah.
too?
Yeah, in so many ways, the way that kids are growing up today is they're not taking risk. They're not free to fail. They're bubble wrapped. We're always monitoring them. We always know where they're at. Like I had a similar childhood to you. It's like, go out and play and be back by dinner time, and
Right.
who knows where you're at. And so in very many ways, what they've stopped doing is quote unquote some of the more riskier things, but even that, put that in quotes. And so they don't develop resilience, they don't develop risk, they don't grow self confidence. And so Jonathan Haidt in his book The Anxious Generation talked about this, a difference between a screen based childhood and a play based childhood. And there's just simple developmental things at a neurological level, a social level, or relational level that kids are not getting because everything is mediated to them through a screen. So they're literally not, everything from exercise to, skinning your knee or having to problem solve or figuring out conflict with a friend or being bored long enough to come up with something to do. All of those are really good things for us to become mature adults. And especially if you add the layer of following Jesus into that, like we don't want just kids who are able to be bubble wrapped for their whole life. There's an important mission for them to be a part of. And so
Yeah.
there's all those dynamics that are coming into play, and they're just missing out on so much that's good for them because they're around a glowing rectangle so much of their day. I mean,
Yeah.
8-9 hours a day by some accounts, 4 or 5 hours a day, and that just is taking a significant toll because of just kind of where they're at.
You mentioned a minute ago this possibility of addiction with screens, and I've read a little bit about this, but you've kind of dived deep into the research on this. Um, what does that look like? The addiction element. Are kids addicted to their screens? How does that happen? How does that play out in their lives?
Yeah, and so Common Sense Media did a study on this, and 50% of teens agreed that they are addicted to their devices. So that's not the old people in the room, that's not moms and dads, that's themselves going, we're addicted. An interesting study just came out in which they asked Gen Z or students, how many of you wish that TikTok never existed?
Wow.
And 47% of Gen Z said they wish they never existed. Now that's the just massive, massive platform, right? So much time is spent on that, billions of users, so much. We'll talk more about that down the road later on, but it's TikTok is such a toxic
Yeah.
environment
Yeah.
overall. And so they're saying like, I can't get off of this thing. And just think about this for a second. Technology is a tool, and sometimes we think about it in these terms. As long as I don't use it in a bad way, then it's not affecting me. And the difference is that a phone is affecting you because it's shaping the way you think. Culture is what you come to see as normal without having to think about it. And good things can be seen as normal and bad things can be seen as normal. The problem is it just seems normal until you pause and step away from it. And so at one level, everything is being normalized for them. At a secondary level, the phone is incredibly addictive because it plays on dopamine, which is the pleasure chemical in your brain, which is key to habit loops forming. So there's a cue, a trigger, and a reward. And so what happens is in many ways, whenever we look at our phone and there's a notification or there's a update or I scroll or whatever, I get a little dopamine hit, which is a little, ooh, that feels really good. And then I have a little micro depressive state right after it. So it's just so then I was like, ooh, I don't feel so good. So maybe I need to do something about that. I was doing a lot of research on this, and whether it's Harvard studies or whether it's journal articles, what they're saying is like the neural pathways that are affected with smartphones are the very same ones that cocaine addiction happens on
I've read
and
that. Yeah.
casino slot machines. So, for example, how do
Wow.
you refresh a phone? You slide down, right? It's the same mechanism of pulling the lever. Ooh, 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 let me see what notifications I'm going to get. What did I miss? It is randomized. The algorithm serves that up to you, and it literally gives you something that's going to get you that dopamine hit back. Another thing to think about is updates to your phones. Like there's a recent update to the new iPhone, and why did we have a new update? Well, is it because the other one just wasn't helping us navigate the world well? No, what they know is that novelty produces greater dopamine releases because after a while, your brain will get used to what you see colors, brightness, even vibrations, little clicks, all those little things. Like when you check off, like you have a to do list on your phone and you hit it and it gives a little vibration and you're like, ooh, that's a little pleasurable feeling. I
Hmm.
accomplished something. That's a neural pathway loop that's being formed. And if you layer in lots of those and social media and likes and all of those things. It's literally tracking. So we have a self-facing camera now, right? Because everybody takes selfies and things like that. Well, literally, it tracks the dilation of your eyes to know when you
Really?
slow down, and it literally can measure when you at least pause a split second on a post. It's just you don't even have to like it yet, and the algorithm will remember that, and it will serve you up more later. So there is a massive amount that's aimed at kids and honestly adults. Like this is not a just a kid thing. This is an adult thing, where we've got to figure this out. But you aim that as an 8-year-old or a 10, they don't have a chance. I saw a CBS special where there was a mom who worked, was trying to work and provide for their kids. Maybe as a single mom, she had an iPad and she was, giving her child that iPad. And then what happened is the child would became addicted to it, and 2 or 3-year-old, and they've just learned their whole neural circuitry is being rewired differently.
Wow.
The way your brain takes in information with a written or a physical book versus the same information of a digital screen, it wires your brain differently. And so the thing that we have to recognize is that kids and students feel addicted to these devices because they are that addictive. I think we're witnessing and we're living through the largest social experiment of our culture right now. And I think we're going to look back, probably 5, 10 years from now, in many ways, to when people look back to when doctors used to recommend cigarettes, as
Right.
here, Camel is the brand that doctors recommend. You're like, whoa, because it's devastating a generation. And maybe we can talk about some of that with the anxiety, loneliness, sadness stuff too. I mean, but just the addictive nature of it, they can't find out ways to get away from it once you get in it. It's that addictive, and it's designed to be. That's not a weird conspiracy theory.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
just in the literature.
One of the causes I'm so passionate about is the pro life cause. And this is just one of the reasons that I love 7 Weeks Coffee. I love 7 Weeks Coffee mainly because it is good coffee. It's mold free, pesticide free, shade grown, low acid, and organically farmed. Plus, it comes from the top 1 to 2% of beans in the world. They fight against child labor, they fight against farmer abuse by sourcing their coffee through direct trade. This allows them to pay their farmers 300% more than fair trade requires. Direct trade allows for unmatched quality control, helps create prospering local economies, and supports farmers in places like Haiti, the Dominican Republic, Honduras, Brazil, Colombia, and Ethiopia. Mainstream coffee companies can't tell you who grows their coffee, but 7 Weeks Coffee can because they personally know all of their farmers. But the main reason I love 7 Weeks Coffee is because they are unapologetically pro-life and they are out to fund the pro-life movement one coffee cup at a time. Their mission is to support ultrasound services by donating 10% of every sale to pregnancy care centers across the country. This is a no-brainer. If you love coffee, you've got to try 7 Weeks Coffee. Go to 7weekscoffee.com and use my code Alisa to get up to 25% off your order. If you subscribe to the Heartbeat Club, you're going to automatically get a discount, but using my code Alisa will get you an additional discount on top of the subscription discount. So go to 7weekscoffee.com, use my code Alisa. Again, that's 7weekscoffee.com. Use my code Alisa. So did I hear you correctly that the forward-facing camera is
Mhm.
measuring the dilation of your pupils in your eyes?
Yes. Yeah,
That
because
is
it tracks.
insane to me.
Yeah, because it's always on, and it'll actually be able to read and pause and actually recording, because all those things we agree to and
Oh,
all the little
yeah.
boxes we check, essentially it's all those useful things that we use our phones for, that make certain things easier. It's the very same things that are able to track us, that are able to monitor us. And now we can talk about this in a minute if you want, the AI aspect of this, because
Yeah.
all the new phones are now learning you. And and so there's a whole new element to it as well. And so we've got to be involved as moms and dads. That's the
Yeah.
main thing is we can't not be involved in this.
Yeah.
That's
No,
why I
for
made this
sure.
course.
Wow. Okay. I do want to ask you, you have worked with students for many years. How many years have you been working with high school students? Like 20
Yeah,
years or something?
yeah, close to 20, about 17, 18 years now in different
Okay.
capacities and teaching, and yeah.
What differences have you seen over I mean, you've probably I mean, I'm sure the students you had 17 years ago are a little bit different than they are today. What would you say are the main differences that you personally have witnessed?
Yeah. So I think I would boil it down to a couple of key categories. One, their ability to focus on an idea for a length of time has shifted.
Mhm.
So for example, any idea, um, unless there's constant like stimulation, just staying with it, they just get distracted. They don't stay on point as easily without more help. And so that's one big overarching factor. Second thing, is just some soft skills that kids and students don't do anymore. They don't look you in the eye. A lot of them won't look you in the eye anymore, because and a lot of them, they won't know how to kind of talk about ideas and have the willingness to process out loud. I think they're taking less risks out there. They don't want to seem stupid, in
Mm.
ways that people before would ask and answer questions. And we've and look, we've all been there, right? We've said things that what maybe that was not a great thought, but I'm on the way to a good thought, right? I'm
Yeah,
learning,
yeah.
right? And that's part of the process. And that's awesome with students and curiosity and all those kind of things. So their ability to stay with a thought, um, honestly, you have to probe and get them to care about things that they should care about a little more with this generation, because it's not front of service. Because in many ways, and maybe we can talk about this piece too, but one of the things this generation, they're addicted to their devices. So it's like digital pacifiers. So anytime they're anxious, worried, sad, lonely, anything like that, they're like, "Oh, I get my phone out." But also, this is also the most medicated generation that's ever existed, and it's very much a therapy culture. So
Yeah,
whatever our phones don't deaden, pills do for students. And so they're not able to have the normal cycles of sadness. Being sad is not the same thing as being depressed. Having stress is not the same thing as having an anxiety disorder. And yet, and again, there's biblical counseling, there's important things. Sometimes medication is necessary. Let me make sure I say all that up front.
sure.
However, we live in a culture that either gives kids a pill or a phone. And if one doesn't desensitize them and calm them, quote unquote, which basically is distract or deaden them to their what they're feeling or thinking, then the other does. And so in many ways, you have to wake them up and allow them to come out of that phone fog to be able to engage and process and engage. And that's part of what we have to do, but both in our families, but also in the classroom and as we're trying to disciple them.
I don't know if we've talked about this, but did you read Bad Therapy by Abigail Schreier?
I did. I
Yeah, that
did.
book was a real eye opener for me, and I've talked about it on the podcast before. I've also talked with Natasha Crane on the Unshaken Faith podcast about that. So if anybody's kind of curious what I'm talking about,
Mhm.
it's really an important book. Abigail Schreier is not a Christian, but she really observed kind of this therapy culture and how not all therapy is really helping, and talk therapy can end up really causing you to focus on negative thoughts, and I've
Yep.
seen this so much, even especially among younger people, where they might think, well, I have ADD or I have ADHD, so therefore I can't read books or I can't do this or I can't do that. And it's almost like all of this, and again, like you said, of course there are real diagnoses, there is a real need for medication at times, nobody's saying that's not the case, but
Yep.
this over medication and this quickness to sort of jump from, okay, this is your diagnosis and this is how you deal with it, and because of that you can't do certain things. It really, I think, in a way leads to a more of a weakness of mind, as I think we're seeing in this younger generation. I do want to ask you though how you see this affecting families, because I will just tell you that I even have friends who are divorced, and that is one of the main reasons they wanted their kids to have a phone, because maybe they don't trust the
Mm.
ex-spouse, and they're thinking, "I want my kid to be able to reach me at all times."
Yeah.
And I actually have a friend who, she's actually the one who taught me about all of the different parental controls on the Apple phone. I would have never known about all this stuff if she hadn't
Mhm.
opened her phone and showed me what all can be done. But I know that that was something that was important for her, and that's why she got her son a phone at such a young age, is because she wanted to make sure he could always contact her if they're with dad or whatever's going on. And so it can really present a dilemma. And I think that to a certain extent, most people of our generation are feeling maybe not that exact dilemma, but some sort of a dilemma, because this has an effect on families too, and the way our families are
Mhm.
structured has an effect on what we do and the decisions we make about the phones. So what have you been observing about that?
Yeah, no, those are really important questions. So I'll come back to those particular situations in just a second, but at a high level, the way I think I would get at this is going, look, have you ever been in a room and then all of a sudden you're there with your kids, your family, the people that you intended to spend time with, and then all of a sudden the people outside of the room became more important than everyone inside the room, all the notifications, the text messages, the posts, the whatever's, and then all of a sudden everybody's drawn in about 12 different directions, and we don't have the ability to stay focused. Sherry Turkle, she's an MIT psychologist. She wrote, um, she's written on this topic a lot, but one of the quotes that really resonated with me was, because of our screens, we are forever elsewhere. That's the way she put it.
Yeah,
It's almost like we can't be fully present anywhere. So the first thing for families, I mean, we're already busy enough. If you've got sports and you got school and you got church and you got all, we're already trying to get everywhere, and it's just hard to try to grab time. Layer in on top of that the fact that everybody's on their devices, including moms and dads, and now we're like, okay, is this present time, or is this everybody doing stuff or getting stuff done time, or is this I'm scrolling time? Like, what are we doing? What are we doing here? So there's that layer. And then there's the layer, the dynamics that you talked about, where we go, well, look, in a perfect world, like, there would be both mom and dad in the home and it'd be a healthy environment, but that's not always the way it works in a fallen, broken world. And so now we have dynamics that we have to navigate there, in terms of, well, I want to be accessible, and there are ways to do that solve those things. And we'll come to this, but one of the questions we have to ask our devices is, what problem are you solving for me?
that's good.
And so that's really what I'm wanting to think about, because so many of us approach just kind of giving a phone as like, this is the solution to all the problems. Go. Board, alarm clock, every, like, it's paying, it's credit card, it's all the things. Well, that isn't going to work. That's actually going to make us more addicted to our tools and our devices. So one of the first things that we have to ask is, what is this thing for? And what problem is it trying to solve? And so when I think that'll help in the family dynamic, because there's different tools. Well, do I just need to know where they're at? Okay, then you can solve that a couple different ways. Do I need to be able to access them or give them a call? Well, then I can do that a couple different ways. I don't have to give them everything to accomplish
Right,
that one thing. And
right.
I think even just learning how to do that would make a massive difference.
As Christian parents, there is nothing we want more than to give our kids a fully orbed biblical worldview. And the best way to do that is to teach our kids how to read and study the Bible for themselves. We tend to do a lot of the planning in Bible instruction for kids. We make the lesson plans, we hold their hands and walk them through it. But this can actually leave them lacking the skills that they need to study the Bible on their own. Well, I want to introduce you to Foundation Worldview's Studying the Bible curriculum, and it really solves this problem. It will train kids in the basic skills they need to soundly read, interpret, and apply scripture. So there are 10 lessons. This is for kids ages 8 and up, and it helps your kids grasp major periods in Bible history so they can understand the big picture of where each biblical narrative fits in. There are 10 lessons focused on basic Bible study skills. This has to do with things like reading verses in context, discerning the difference between descriptive passages and prescriptive passages, focusing on truths revealed about God. And then there's 10 lessons exploring how to correctly read different biblical genres, because so much confusion can come in when we don't understand what kind of a book we're reading when we come to the Bible. So these materials set kids on the trajectory of seeking God through His Word all their lives. And by the way, we are consistently hearing from parents that they learn just as much as the kids when they go through these materials. So if you want to check this out for your kids, teach your kids to read and study and apply the Bible for themselves, you can go to foundationworldview.com and use the code Alisa to receive 10% off any family license of any Foundation Worldview curriculum. They are all great. They have curriculum on gender and sexuality, critical thinking, comparative worldviews, but definitely check out Studying the Bible for your kids ages 8 and up. Foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa. No, that's a really good point, 'cause and it's really hard too, because, I mean, you're in this, you've got kids. But it's so hard because I've heard even people say you can even say, "Well, I'm not gonna let my kids have a phone," but if they have friends with phones, then they kinda have a phone too, because they have the same access that their
Yeah.
friends are gonna have, at least when they're with their friends. And,
Mhm.
of course, with me sharing earlier what we have done with our daughter, by no means am I claiming that we have done it all correctly, because I actually think back, there are several things I really wish that we would have never let that train out of the gate, right? There are things I wish
Mhm.
I could, well, and, I say I wish. We can go back. I wanna talk to you
Mhm.
about that, like, your advice even, because I know that's a huge question a lot of parents would have. I mean, I think we've been pretty conservative with it, but even being conservative with it, I
Mhm.
think, my goodness, I wish that we could undo some of those decisions. I remember, Jonathan, being at Impact 360 with the high school students, and of course, one thing I love about Impact 360 is they're not allowed to have phones when they're at one of the summer experiences, which is
Mm.
so good, because then they're not distracted by all that stuff and they can really be present for what's going on. But I was sitting at lunch with a group of students. I think they were all girls. And one of the girls was 15, and she didn't have a phone at all. And so, because I was asking them, what's it been like being here this week and not having access to your phone? And she said, well, I actually don't have a phone. And I asked her, I said, are you like upset about that? Or are you okay with it? And she goes, no, I'm actually really grateful. She's like, of course I kind of wanted one, but when my parents just made that decision, I'm actually really kind of glad that I don't have to even deal with that. And I thought that was really interesting. But like I said, there are things that I wish that I could go back and change. And I realized too that there are things where I was making excuses. There was one where, we said, well, we didn't allow any searching or any sort of internet access. But then it was like, well, for school though, she's gonna have to click links. And but then, that's kind of an excuse, because I realize now she doesn't have to click those on her phone. She can go up to the family
Mhm.
computer and click those links she needs. But that's the kind of stuff where we have to make the hard decisions that require more of our time, engagement, and commitment. So, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, for sure, and I can so relate to all of that, and again, guilt-free zone, because the world's moving so fast, it's like, "Okay, we've got to do something." And what the last thing I would want is somebody watching this just feeling paralyzed or going, "Oh, I've already blown it. We can't make a change. We can't course
Right.
correct. We can't reset. We can't aim at something that's more life-giving or a healthy way to approach this." That's a lie. You absolutely can. And there's some simple things that we can start doing to make a big difference. So there's principles, which I teach on, and then there's practices. And
Mm.
so the principles you can apply in any situation, depending upon what you're facing, right? How old your kid is, and all those kind of things. And then the practices, that will depend on what devices you're using. Like, do you homeschool? Are they in public school? Are they in private school? Are they in sports after school? Do they like, what is it? Again, what are we trying to do? And so you take the principle. The thing that I would just, as a blanket encouragement, is just do not hand your kid a phone and trust that they're going to be able
Right.
to figure that out for themselves. And so, and then as moms and dads, we've got to go, okay, what are the things that we're trying to do and what problems are we trying to solve with these devices? And that's going to be a massive thing, because at the end of the day, they don't naturally know how to do it. Now, they don't know anything different. They're digital natives. They've never known anything different.
Hmm.
But one thing I wanted to come back to that you said, which I think is really important, and the image that kind of sticks out to me that's helped me think about it is, have you ever been walking maybe in an airport or something like that, and you'll see escalators and then you'll see stairs next to it? And
Yeah.
so now, which one is easier? The escalator, right? Which
Yeah.
one is better? Well, probably the stairs. Not always, but and so one of the things that we have to ask our technology is, what are you making easier for me that needs to be harder?
Oh, that's really good. Say that again.
What are you making easier for me that needs to be harder? So
That's
it's
good.
kind of the escalator versus the stairs. And so sometimes what we do is our phones and our technology, because it's an attention economy and it wants more and more of our attention and time, it's designed to integrate everything and make everything easier. But that's not always good for me. Like, there's certain things I need to make harder for me. So for example, here's just a really practical example. We live in the era of Google Pay and Apple Pay, and you can tap your phone. And by the way, what does it do? It like buzzes and it's like, ooh, I accomplished something. I hit it and it paid for something.
Dings, gets a little bell
You
ring.
you did wow, look at me. I spent money maybe I didn't even have, and I got a notification.
Yeah.
Well done, and little stars and the phone lit up, and it's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
"Oh, throwing me a party. This is
They're
great."
smart, aren't they? They know what to do.
And so the dopamine hit goes, but here's the thing. Well, is it better for me because maybe I'm paying for things with Apple Pay or Google Pay or whatever with a double click that's too easy for me. So maybe don't install that on your phone, especially if you're trying to get more distance from your phone, because now if all of your payment methods, your alarm clock, all your work, all your family time, if everything is designed to go through your phone, guess what? You're never going to be without your phone. And
That's
so
true.
so part of this is starting to pull apart some of these things. And look, I know this is going to be countercultural, and some people are like, you know what? That seems like a lot of effort. And in some ways it is, but let's look around at the culture because our kids are dying. They are struggling, they're
Yeah.
anxious, they're lonely, they're hurting, they're confused, and adults are too. So there's a better way. And so really the question is, okay, are we actually going to attempt to do something different because right now everybody's getting the same result. They're distracted, they're sad, they're anxious, they're lonely, and they're all addicted to their phones. And
Yeah.
so we need to do something different there.
Well, this is challenging for me as well because I just discovered the tap thing on the phone, like maybe this year. And I even, my husband and I joke with one another. It's like, you get a tap, you get a tap, you get a tap.
Yeah.
And I am positive that people spend more money when all you have to do is tap your phone. Well, I mean, don't they even know this with even cash versus credit cards? If you just use cash, you end up
Oh
spending
yeah.
less because you feel it. You feel the cash leaving your wallet, and it makes more of an impact. But it makes me think too about the kids that are begging for their parents' attention. And the parents are the ones addicted to phones and,
Yeah.
can't look up from their phones as well. So it would be really wise, I think, for us as parents. And I am preaching to myself right now. I'm looking right in my camera where I see my face staring back at me. That we need to model how to be a Christian from a biblical worldview who is engaging with this material because really our kids, we know this in other areas, our kids are going to tend to do what we do rather than what we tell them to do. And I
Yeah.
know that's something that's really important to you as well. And we're going to get to our 5 questions in just a moment because I know that's what everybody's waiting for. We want to know what are those 5 questions that we
Mhm.
must answer before giving our kids screens or social media. But talk about how that plays in with a biblical worldview perspective. Because one
Yeah.
of the things that you and I were just at the Prestonwood Biblical Worldview Conference this past weekend, and you were there on Friday night when we did that panel with Lee Strobel, myself, and Allie Beth Stuckey. And one of the things that has stayed with me from that night was somebody asked Allie Beth, what are you most concerned about in the church? And she said, I'm concerned about Christians who compartmentalize all different areas of
Yeah.
their lives instead of seeing it as one holistic biblical worldview. She said, when she said that, like a light went on because I'm thinking I see that in so many areas of Christendom where people will say, well, you shouldn't talk about politics if you're a Christian, or you shouldn't, really get into ethics too much if you're a Christian. Just stick
Mhm.
with theology, just stick with the actual, gospel and let everything else work itself out. And I mean, of course, theology is primary, what we think about God, and everything's going to flow out of that. But at the same time, they're not in different boxes. We are holistic. These all need to be integrated holistically. And I think the smartphone is no different. So speak to the biblical worldview component of this as well. You don't have to wait until November to vote. You can vote every day with your dollar. At goodranchers.com, you can make a powerful choice to vote for American meat, support American agriculture, and make your voice heard for transparency in our food. Good Ranchers sources all their meat exclusively from American farms, which not only supports local ranchers, but it also ensures that you get high-quality American-raised meat with no antibiotics, no added hormones or seed oils ever. By shopping from goodranchers.com, you're making a statement about the kind of values you stand for, values of quality, hard work, and dedication to American tradition. And right now, Good Ranchers is having a presidential promo. This means for a limited time, you can get a free add-on for a whole 4 years until the next election. That means when you subscribe to any of their boxes, you get to decide if you want extra plain chicken breast, Angus ground beef, Applewood smoked bacon, or wild-caught salmon in every order for 4 years. It's the perfect way to ensure that you always have high-quality American meat in your kitchen. Every cut is pre-trimmed, individually packed, and vacuum sealed. This makes your life so much easier. No more messy meal prep, no more wasted food, no more freezer burn or poor store packaging. Good Ranchers helps you get the most flavor and value out of every ounce of meat you buy. And in this economy, that matters more every single day. So don't miss out. Use my code Alisa to claim this presidential promo worth over $1,200 and bring 100% American meat to your family. GoodRanchers.com. Use my code Alisa, American meat delivered.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I so appreciate, your words on that, because if Christianity is true, every area of life is connected.
Yeah,
So my entertainment, my phone, the way I live, my relationships, my time, my money, all of that is connected. And so many times we think about, well, as long as I'm not doing bad stuff with my phone, then it's not a big deal. It's not something that I have to pay attention to. As long as I'm not looking at porn, for example, or
right.
I'm not, you know, having an affair with my device or something. Like I'm choosing some of those broader examples. And then we go, well, then it's just neutral. But again, it's always shaping us. Technology is not neutral. It's always shaping us. It'd be like this. If we were out for the next 2 weeks and we were digging with a shovel 12 hours a day for 2 weeks, the tool of a shovel, it's going to shape our body in certain ways just because we're using it. And in the same way, the brain does the same thing. But from a biblical worldview perspective, I want to highlight two things. It's how we define freedom. And this is where moms and dads, I think we need to do a better job leading and going first in this regard, because our culture says freedom is the ability to do whatever you want to do whenever you want to do it. And if that means, as moms and dads, if what we're communicating either intentionally or unintentionally to our kids is, when you grow up, you'll be able to do whatever you want to do with your phone whenever you want to do it, just like me and mom can. But right now, you've got to obey the rules because you're a kid.
Hmm.
Like, if that is the way that lands, they're going to, as soon as they're able to break free from that, they're going to.
Oh, yeah.
But if freedom is embracing the right restraints and cultivating the right desires and aiming at the right things, and there's element of design and flourishing involved, that changes the equation. And so as a mom or a dad, we don't want to ask our kids to do anything we're not willing to do, And so, for example, I don't get transparency and privacy. I mean, my wife has access to all my phone, my passwords, my email, internet, social media, all that whenever she wants, you know,
Yep.
because I don't have a right to privacy there. I don't need one. And our kids don't need those things either. And so, in many ways, from a biblical worldview perspective, as a mom or a dad, we've got to go first in just that one area of biblical understanding of freedom. Freedom doesn't exist to just do whatever we want.
That's
Freedom is
right.
in service of what's good and true. So, in light of the biblical worldview, though, when it comes to our phones, it's a discipleship issue. We submit that to the lordship of Jesus, just like every other area of life. And how much more so if we're all on this thing 4, 5, 7, 8, 9 hours a day, then wow, that's a massive stewardship of time, influence, shaping ability. I mean, you've talked about this in your books, which are so helpful on just kind of deconstruction and what's going on in all those areas. But from a worldview perspective, really so much of that happens in those environments. It's just a thousand little nudges where people are presented things as normal. Well, if a truly loving person would think this, or a truly loving person would do that, and they're never argued into those things, they just see it presented over and over and over again. The number one search engine for teenagers today is TikTok over Google, which is
Really?
fascinating. And so what that means is, think about it. When you search for something in Google, you're getting information. When you search on TikTok, you're getting an influencer. You're getting a face. You're getting a story.
That's right.
You're getting emotion. And honestly, somebody who's probably pretty good at what they're doing, to draw you in and to maybe tweak and shift kind of what you think. So there's a worldview shaping reality that's happening. And there's my role as a disciple of Jesus of how I relate to my phones and my technology. And all of that is connected. We can't just put that over here. Well, as long as I'm not doing something bad with it, then it's okay. Then it's just neutral, and I can just kind of do whatever on it 5, 6, 7, 8 hours a day. And that's just not how it works. And the Christian worldview doesn't really allow us to do that, because Jesus needs to be Lord of our devices and screens as well. And we need to have sanctification and become more like Jesus in that regard. Motivated by grace, again, not legalism, and empowered by the Holy Spirit. Absolutely. But that's what we're aiming at.
Yeah, that's really wise. I really am so grateful for this course that you've put together. I know we're going to give our audience a special discount, but we've been promising we're going to talk about these 5 questions
Yeah.
that every parent must answer before giving your kids screens, social media, all the things. So let's dive right in. What is number 1? What's the first question every parent must answer before giving our kids this stuff?
Yeah. The first question you have to ask and answer is, why are you giving them social media or a screen? And we have to start there, because we need to be clear. What's the motivation? What is the goal? Like, what is it that you're trying to accomplish? What are you trying to solve? Um, Again, what age is your child? So a lot of people may not know this, but you have to be 13 before you're allowed to be on social media. At least you have to check that box whenever you're getting on Instagram, for example, or something like that. And that was completely arbitrary, by the way. It was going to be 16, but then they just lowered it to 13 kind of at the last minute. And there's no psychological or neurological reason developmentally around it. And it just was 13. A lot of states are wanting to raise that. Maybe we can talk about that later. But at the very minimum, your kid needs to at least be 13 before you check that box. Because again, they're watching mom or dad basically lie for them to get a
Yeah.
social media app. And that's not a win, right? So we don't want to be doing that. And but the thing at first is, why are you giving them social media? Is the first answer, or the first question that you have to answer, because what problem am I solving for them? Is it because all their friends are on it? Is it because they just keep asking? Is it because, why is it that I'm going to do that? And that sounds like a simple question, and it is, but it's a profound one, because if our motivation is simply all of their other friends have it, is that really a good answer? If we're seeing what we're seeing happen among this generation with the sadness and the loneliness and everything else, and you don't just want to give in to give them social media so they are just like all their other friends. Like, that's not a good reason to do it. So what good thing is this going to add in their life? Is it going to add something good in their life? And so
Yeah.
so that first question really is, why are you giving them social media? And just being honest about that. Reflect a little bit as mom and dad about that, and just say, you know what, we're weary, we're giving in, they have worn us down. Maybe
Mm.
that's why we're giving it. And so just being honest about that. And again, we've all been there, where
Sure.
we're just like, you know what, but what is this actually doing for them, and why?
Yeah.
And so that would be the first question as mom or dad to ask.
Yeah, I think that's important because, too, I think even to get into the weeds a little bit of dividing, making distinctions, because that why question needs to be applied across the board. Because, like we were talking about earlier, a lot of people, maybe even among the generation that raised their kids before all this stuff was a thing, they might just think it's super simple. Like, you just don't give them a phone, or you just don't do this. And,
Mhm.
maybe probably would be the most simple answer.
Yeah.
But, there are different things about our world. Like when I was driving, for example, when I got my driver's license at 16 years old, I didn't have a phone. Nobody had phones, but there were call boxes all along the interstate. There were pay phones that you could pull into any gas station and call somebody if you needed to. Those things aren't around anymore.
Right.
And so there are things to consider because it is a bit of a different world. But there is the option of, and I'm sure they're constantly coming out with new technologies with these things, but like versions of dumb phones, or even,
Hmm.
it's possible even to give your kid some sort of a phone that has a screen but doesn't have any internet access or social media or
Right.
apps. I mean, I know even just on the iPhone, you can set it to where without your password being put in, they can't download any apps. My daughter couldn't
Mhm.
until just now. We've kind of changed this, but she couldn't even put a number in her phone unless I put the password in, and that
Yeah,
number
add
could
a
stay in her
contact.
phone. Or yeah, and then she couldn't even
Mhm.
be receive texts from a number that wasn't already inputted in her phone from me having the password. I mean, it takes a lot of vigilance and you got to learn how to do it, but those things do exist. But there is a difference even between that and then opening the door to social media. Like we still don't do social media. I just there's nothing there. When I asked the why question about social media for my almost 16, she'll be 16 in a couple weeks, my baby.
Mhm.
There's nothing good that I can see coming from her having social media at this point. And so that's a really good question to ask is why would I do it? Well, the only reason I would do it, well, she doesn't even want it, thank God. So I don't feel like I'm being worn down because that would probably be very hard. But I can't, I mean, the only reason I would do it is just because everybody does it. And that's never a good reason, right? If everybody jumped
Yeah.
off a cliff, would you jump off a cliff? We all know this. All
We
right.
know that.
What's the second question to ask?
Yeah, yeah. So if the first question really gets at the heart of what's driving us as a parent and mom or dad, the second question is this: why do they want social media? Like, what is driving them? And what's their main reason? Have you asked them and talked about it? Right? Is it simply all my friends are on it? How will they use it? Those are questions to ask. How will social media help them? And what you want to do with this is really start a conversation to really understand what's driving them. So, for example, here's how this could look. Maybe over dinner, hey, honey, I know you want I know you want social media, and we'll talk about that. But let's just back up a second. Tell me why is it that you want social media? I'd love to hear just kind of why it is that you want, and maybe just see what's there and then just maybe ask them, well, tell me more about that kind of questions. Try to get at least under the level because there's two things that will happen. And in many ways, whenever it came to talking about, for example, for example, sexuality and things like that, it used to be called the talk, and now it's a conversation of a long
Yes.
thing. That's very much what this is when it
Yeah.
comes to social media and screens. And so what we're wanting to do is help engage them where they can tell us, and this is what's we have to be ready as moms and dads not to do is we don't want to shut them down when they've got false ideas or immature beliefs because they're kids. They're supposed to have a lot of false ideas and
Yeah.
immature beliefs. So if we squash and shame them every time they say something that's probably a really bad reason, if we're being honest, then guess what they're not going to talk to us about? They're not
Yeah.
going to open up to us. They're not going to tell us what's really going on their heart or the insecurities they may have or the fear of being left out or whatever that is. So the heart of this second question is why do they want social media? And even if they don't really know anything more than all their friends are on it, this is an opportunity to use that question to help show them that you may not have thought about that question, but that's a really important question that you probably ought to think about.
It's
And
really
so I'd
good.
love for you to think a little bit more about that before maybe mom and dad are open to having this. You have social media at some point, but we'd love to know more about why you want it and how you'd use it. Like, what do you think? And just kind of draw them in to have some ownership in that. And that's a big win. So the first question really gets at what's driving you as mom or dad. And the second question really gets at them, what's driving them and why they want screens and social media.
Good. How about number 3? What's the third question?
Yeah. So then what you'll do is okay, which app will you start with and why? Which social media app will you start with and why? And notice I didn't say apps plural because what I'm encouraging is a stair step kind of method because what we're doing is we want to train them. Like you mentioned earlier, we want them to be eventually to the place where they're a trained disciple of Jesus, following him and learning how to navigate screens wisely and with self control and impulse control and boundaries and understanding of freedom. That's where we want to go. That's where we're trying to get to. So if you come to a place where you're like, okay, they're at a time and a maturity level where we want to introduce something, which app are you going to start with? And what will that look like? So I would experiment with one app
Mhm.
and then I would have a very small circle. So let's say that you've got maybe a 16-year-old, and eventually you're going to let them on social media or 17-year-old, maybe you're on Instagram. Okay. That's a very common scenario. All my friends are on Instagram. I'm missing out. I want to see everything that they're doing or saying or right, everything else. And so what you want to do is go, okay, we're going to start with this one app, or maybe it's Be Real or whatever it is That was a popular one. There's, it randomizes when it kind of pops up to be real. That's a little less invasive than Instagram, or at least that was the idea. So maybe one of two of those. And so, but what you want to do is you want to give them one app, and then limit the circle of friends that they have on it. The tendency now is everybody wants to follow like a billion people and have a billion people follow them. But what you want to do with your kids is go, okay, you can follow which of your five friend, like you can have up to five people you can follow.
That's
Who would
good.
you like to follow and why? And then as mom or dad, do you know those five people? Because like that's, he who walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion fool suffers harm. That's Proverbs 13:20. So who is now the voice in my kid's ear and showing them reality and sharing posts with them? And if it's a small enough circle, then you can evaluate as you go along every month or so. And you go, hey, how's this going? And, things like that. And so what you want to do is you want to start with one app, not all at once, and have limitations on that app. Screen time limitation, as well as who they're allowed to follow and who they're following and things like that, which gets us to another question, which really
Yeah,
is
go ahead.
question number 4. Yeah. So question number 4 is, who will they be allowed to follow and be friends with? Now, even that question is revolutionary right now, because I would encourage you to make your Instagram. Let's just stick with Instagram because that's a popular one. Um, Make your account private, which means you have to approve a friend request. Make sure location services are off, which means that your kid can't be tracked by other people, um, especially on Snapchat and things like that. And I go into details on this in the refresh course and all that, but I want to make sure that those are important things that people know. And what you want to do is you want to have a reason for who they're following and why. Because one of the things that happens today in the bullying era and the toxic friendships and fear of missing out and all those kind of things is they don't need to be following people who are tagging them and leaving them out of invites to parties and going out to see movies, and that, because all that's doing is introducing another layer of insecurity and
Right.
dysfunction to those relationships. So who are 3 life-giving people that you can follow? Okay, who are some influencers that are positive, that would be good influencers, that would actually have a biblical worldview to share, or that you could, and then like those videos and use the algorithm in your favor, like good things, and that will serve up more of those things. And so, because the reality is there's also a safety issue here, and you have to know who your kids are friends with on these platforms, and a lot of parents just have no idea. They be and again, the technology, and it gets out beyond them, and I get it, but what's happening if we just kind of give it to them and say download the app and go for it?
Right.
Look, those are made to get more and more attention and to make those networks bigger, which make us use it more. And so, and the dopamine hits, so all that stuff's related. So we just need to have a plan. So what's driving them? What's driving us? What's driving them? Which app will we start with and why? And then who will they be allowed to follow and why? And have a limit to that.
Yeah, and this is something too I think a lot of parents may not have considered. I know we didn't really think this all the way through when we were first starting out, so I will give parents, some wisdom from what we learned. I mean, even things like the Bible app are really
Yeah.
social media platforms. There are a lot of apps that you may not realize are social media apps that actually are. So on the Bible app, you can make a profile, you can talk to other people. I actually, Jonathan, had a young lady come up to me after I spoke at a conference, because I think I had mentioned the Bible app, and she said, "You have to be careful with the Bible app." And she and her mom were explaining to me that there was actually like a pedophile who had catfished her
Mm.
on the Bible app and pretended to be another 13-year-old girl or something like that. So, parents, you have to be really vigilant with this stuff. And, like we said, no judgment because it's hard. We're all trying to figure it out.
Yeah.
But even things like YouTube and Pinterest, for example, if you do
Hmm.
Pinterest is basically all the algorithms work very similarly now to where Pinterest is really kind of like TikTok. In fact, lots of TikTok videos are on Pinterest. A lot of the TikTok videos get put on YouTube. So even if
Right.
they just have these kind of minor apps, you do need to be aware that a lot of that same content is going to be coming in through those places. And even something as seemingly innocent as the Bible app can be something you have to be careful about and make sure
Yes.
I don't know if there are settings you can go into to make that to where they can't make a profile. I'm sure there are, but just to consider that. So these are really good questions, Jonathan, and feel free to add anything onto that and then go on to number 5.
Yeah, no, and you're exactly right. In Christian circles, sometimes like, well, okay, well, they can have the Bible app, it's Christian social media, but then they use that in the same ways that they would use other things. So you still need to know who their friends are. You still
That's
need to
right.
know how much time they're on. And then honestly, reading a physical Bible apart from their phone is such a good thing. Now, again, we use our tools and adults, and look, I read the Bible on my phone sometimes, and if I'm on my physical Bible with me. However, what we want to do is we want to build some habits that pull us away from our devices. And so that's big. So I love the
Right.
advice you gave there, because we're shaping the environment that's shaping them. In many ways, though, we kind of turn them loose in the Amazon jungle. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of beautiful things in the Amazon jungle, but there's a lot of things that want to eat you too. So you got to be real careful about what we're just kind of letting our kids run headlong into.
Yeah,
And
that's
so
good.
the fifth question is really, what limits will you set? What limits will you set? Because as a parent, and this is hard, and this is honestly where parents struggle, because this is where the tears come and the arguments come and the frustration comes, and then you try to limit, and then they lash out, and then they manipulate, and we're all sinful, right? We all have things we're trying to figure out. And then that's why going back to that first question is so important. Why am I giving my kids social media or screens? And what's driving me? Is it just appeasing my kid? Is it just because if I'm asking the question, what's best for them? That's a very different question. And so a lot of times it's not easy to set limits, but if your child has social media and screens, they need limits. All of us
Yeah.
need limits. We should all have some form of, I ran into a boundary because years ago they took away the you never get to the bottom of your feed, right? It's an endless scroll. Like there is no bottom. Like the
Right.
algorithm will keep serving up more and more. And this is a big one. And this is something I go into a lot more detail in the refresh course. But you've got to set a password, and you've got to not tell your kids the password to
Yeah.
the app. I know it's easy. Maybe you're driving down the phone. They're like, "Hey, can I watch this?" And you're like, "Oh, what's your password?" I'm like, "Well, I can't pull over right now." You're like, "Come
Yeah,
on, mom. Come on,
they're
dad."
good at it too. They're good at
And then
catching you at just the moment when they know
you're
you're
just
gonna
like,
give it to
"Oh."
them.
And then like when you give your kids, like maybe you give them a phone for Christmas or a device, and then I mean, do I like being in on Christmas Day with 3 hours in my study trying to set up all the things on the phone again? No, but is it worth it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I don't want to have to do that, but that's part of it. And so they need limits. They need to be able to ask permission for things. And all of this may sound to some people watching this right now as completely countercultural. But my encouragement again is like, look around. Doing what's normal right now is making kids sad. It's making them lonely, anxious. It's stealing their worldview. It's stealing their zest for life. We need to find a better path for all of us, including our kids. And so, is it inconvenient? Yep. Does it take more time? Absolutely. Is it worth it? You better believe it. And we must engage on that level.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot, but there is so much more to cover. And for even just informationally, statistics, data, studies, things that are going to help equip parents to be able to make the best decisions they can for their kids, which is why your course is so important. And I just really want to urge my audience to check it out. If you have kids at all, especially kids that are nearing that time when you're thinking about giving them a phone, really want to direct you to Jonathan's course. Why don't you tell us the special deal you have for our audience, and there's a code they can use, and I just think this is going to be so helpful to a lot of people.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alisa. I really appreciate that. And again, it's never too early to start. Let me just say one quick thing about that.
Hmm.
Imagine growing up with toddlers right now and then thinking ahead and having someone help you build a plan that grows with your child. And I really built the course in many ways for that
Wow.
person too,
Yeah.
because you can shape the environment that they grow in, and you're building all these questions in from the beginning. Whereas a lot of parents right now are playing catch up. We're like, okay, wow, that happened fast, right? So here's what I need to do, and here's what I need to do differently. And this course applies to both parents, whether you're starting with little bitties at home or you're way down the journey and you need to course correct and everything in between. And there's walkthroughs, there's things that are in there, and it's refresh. It's a practical guide for Christian parents on smartphones and social media. And what I want to do for your audience, Alisa, because this is so important, is give them a 20% discount code, uh, just using your name, Alisa,
Yep.
and you'll get
Great.
20% off, because starting is the hardest part.
Yeah.
And sometimes we hear things and we just go, I need to do something about that.
That's
And then
good.
we get busy, we get distracted, and then we're like, man, I haven't done anything about that. And this area is so important, Alisa, that we must do something. And so that's why I'm so burdened for it, because
Yeah.
honestly, we don't have to do everything. We don't have to be perfect, but we have to do something. And I want to be a guide for busy moms and dads who are trying to figure this thing out with walkthroughs and checklists and videos. And I'm adding questions all the time because technology changes all the time.
Hmm.
And I want to make it something that somebody can walk alongside you together. And there's a community in there together that are figure this thing out. So yeah, so it's the code will be Alisa, and it'll be 20% off so that you
That's
can
great.
start this today, get access to all this, and be able to watch this and build your plan for your family to apply those principles for you.
Love it. And what's the website?
Yeah, if you just go to jonathanmorrow.org, jonathanmorrow.org, or if you go to resources.jonathanmorrow.org, that'll get you to the Refresh course. And again, the course is called Refresh, a practical online course for Christian parents on smartphones and social media. There's links there. You can find links probably in the description down below to get
Yep.
there as well. But jonathanmorrow.org will get you to the page, and then you can click on resources and get to the course, and there'll be a banner and links and all that. But the course is called Refresh because we all need a refresh at the end of
Yeah.
the day, kind of playing off the kind of the refresh button and all that,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we all need help in this area. And so we need somebody to go, okay, let's build a plan and aim at something, because what's going on right now is not working for
It's
so
good.
many of us. And so
Yeah.
let's start a different way.
Perfect. Well, I want to thank my guest, Jonathan Morrow. Again, go to jonathanmorrow.org. Use my code Alisa for 20% off your course. That's a very generous discount. So, again, jonathanmorrow.org. Use my code Alisa. And always, I want to ask you to subscribe and click the bell icon if you're watching on YouTube to be notified every time we release a new video. Always helps if you leave good reviews on the various audio platforms. We're so grateful for the many of you who have done that, and really want to encourage Christian parents to get this course. And one of the things I really love about it is that it is very non-judgmental, and it gives you little practical things you can do so you don't get too overwhelmed. But let's remember, as we pursue Christ, let's keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin. We'll see you next time.
So pray for me and I will pray for you. No turning right or left, we'll make it through. The road that's narrow and the gate that's small. Don't give up, it's gonna be